It was just after dawn when Atlantic Sky Flight 722 began boarding. The first-class cabin was as silent as an early morning gallery, everything neatly arranged, polished, and gleaming with a kind of cold perfection. Chief Flight Attendant Cheryl Adams performed one final inspection. Her hair was pulled into a tight bun, her deep navy uniform was wrinkle-free, and her smile was carefully rehearsed. She had worked this job for 18 years, and to her first class wasn't just a place of service. It was a domain, a space where people had to belong to deserve a seat. When Elias Brooks entered, the air seemed to shift subtly. He wore a simple white shirt, a light gray blazer, and carried a compact suitcase. No Rolex, no Hermes tie, no assistant trailing behind. Just a black man, tall, composed, quiet, who walked directly to seat 2A and sat down. Cheryl stepped over gently, but with a probing gaze. "Excuse me, sir," she said in a tone just courteous enough. "This section is business class. Economy is toward the rear." Elias looked up, his expression calm. He handed her his ticket. "Seat 2A." Cheryl glanced at the ticket, then at him, then at the ticket again. A pause 1 second too long. "Yes. Apologies for the mistake." Her smile returned, but it no longer felt warm. Elias said nothing. He fastened his seatbelt, pulled out a worn leather notebook, and began writing in fine, deliberate script. Cheryl walked away, but not without glancing back once more. In the cabin behind passengers continued boarding a man with a Louis Vuitton suitcase, a young female CEO wearing designer sunglasses, and an A-list actor accompanied by his assistant. No one paid attention to Elias, except for one woman seated across the aisle, a silver-haired, sharp-eyed, middle-aged woman who was watching him as though she'd just recognized something, but wasn't quite sure. Meanwhile, Elias continued writing as if each drop of ink carried the weight of an entire system. No one knew the man in seat 2A wasn't just a passenger. He was a test, and today they were the ones being observed. The flight gradually leveled. The engine hummed in a low metallic lullaby as the aircraft ascended toward 35,000 feet. Sunlight filtered through the windows, casting a soft golden hue across the first-class cabin, elegant and unnervingly still. Cheryl Adams began the usual service routine. Dom Perignon, champagne, warm towels, scented with lemongrass, and breakfast menus featuring eggs Benedict with smoked salmon. Everything was executed like a choreographed dance, precise, graceful, with not a step out of place. Until she reached seat 2A. Elias sat calmly, his notebook now tucked away. He looked out the window light, catching the angle of his face, a quiet jawline and contemplative eyes, as if reading an old book. "What would you like to drink?" Cheryl asked, still holding the tray of chilled champagne. Elias turned to her gently. "May I see the beverage menu?" Cheryl hesitated for half a second, then said, "I think water would be best. It's easy to get dehydrated at this altitude." No harshness, but also no choice. Elias nodded. "Then water, please." She poured it, no tray, no napkin, no lemon slice, just a plastic cup. Meanwhile, the man in seat 4C, a middle-aged white businessman, was handed a glass of champagne with a warm, friendly tone. "Hope you have a pleasant flight, sir." Between those two greetings, Elias took a sip of his water. His eyes remained calm, but under the table his hand reopened the leather notebook. A fresh line of ink appeared. Service disparity initial phase. Clear indication. From a nearby seat, Jamie, a young flight attendant, glanced from Cheryl to Elias. She had been watching since he boarded, and something about his response kept her eyes fixed. No anger, no demand, just silence. But a silence complete of intent. Cheryl continued serving other passengers. Elias was the only one who didn't receive a breakfast menu. As she pushed the cart closer, Elias asked politely, "May I choose my meal?" Cheryl didn't look at him. "We're almost out. There's an egg sandwich if you want, a cold slice of bread with mashed eggs, no sauce, no greens, served without a silver tray napkin or cutlery." Elias accepted the tray without protest. He checked the temperature of the food, opened his notebook again, and resumed writing. This time, Jaime saw the words, patterned behavior. Policy or personal bias. In seat 1D, an older woman, Ellen Stanford had begun to frown. She glanced at Cheryl, then at Elias. She had once been a teacher, had lived through the era of overt segregation, and what she saw today was not unfamiliar. She leaned over and asked Elias, "You all right, dear?" Elias turned, offering a faint smile. "I'm fine, but thank you." "You know," Ellen said, her voice warm and low, "sometimes the way someone hands you a glass of water says a whole lot." Elias nodded. "I know, and I'm noting every drop." Midway through the flight, other passengers began to take notice. Paul Monroe, a political aide, quietly removed his earbuds when he saw Elias take out his phone photograph, his meal tray, adjust his seat belt, then inspect a device under his chair. No fuss, no complaints, but systematic. Cheryl returned this time with a note of irritation in her eyes. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice raised slightly. Elias looked at her calmly, taking notes on the quality of the flight. "We don't allow passengers to take photos of the cabin," Cheryl snapped. "I could ask you to delete them." Elias folded his phone shut. "I understand. But I'm not just a passenger." In that moment, even before anyone fully understood what it meant, the air in the cabin shifted. The soft hum of the ventilation system continued steadily, like the artificial breathing of the aircraft. Everyone seemed to have retreated into their world, some reading, some watching movies, others closing their eyes and leaning back, waiting for the main meal. Elias closed his leather notebook, his gaze sweeping across the space in front of him. From where he sat, first class looked like a silent stage where every small action carried meaning. And then, a strange noise shattered the stillness. "She's not okay." The anxious whisper came from seat 1F, prompting headphones to be pulled off. Ellen Stanford, the older woman who had spoken to Elias earlier, was trembling, her hands gripping the armrests tightly. Her eyes darted frantically, her breath short and rapid. Cheryl rushed over, but there was a visible hesitation. She fumbled for the medical assistance button, her movements clumsy and indecisive. Elias had already stood up, not hurried, not panicked, but firm. "Please give me space," he said, his voice soft but resolute. "Sit down," Cheryl snapped. "You're not part of the crew?" "She's experiencing an acute vestibular episode," Elias said, kneeling beside Ellen with the practiced calm of someone trained. "I need a neck support and a backup oxygen tank. Immediately." Jamie, the young flight attendant, ran to retrieve the medical kit. Paul Monroe stood up to assist. Elias lifted Ellen's head, adjusted her posture, checked her pulse, and used a cold towel to wipe her forehead. He counted her breaths and tested the neural response in her hand. "Can you hear me?" he asked gently. "My name is Elias. I need you to keep your breathing steady." Cheryl stood frozen. Elias's handling of the situation was unlike that of any ordinary passenger. Every step was by the book, almost memorized. The captain was called out from the cockpit. Elias gave a quick, confident report, his voice steady like that of a resident physician. No need for an emergency landing if we have oxygen and a stable environment. I'll keep monitoring. Jaime asked softly, "Have you worked in medicine?" Elias didn't look at her. He replied, "I was trained for situations like this, and many others." As Ellen began to stabilize, Elias helped her lean back and rechecked her oxygen level. She exhaled, her voice weak but clear. "Where did you work before?" Young man Elias smiled. "I used to work on the ground, but these days I spend more time in the air." Ellen grasped his hand, old but steady. "You remind me of my son. He was discriminated against too, just because of his skin. But he never let that define how he lived." Elias nodded, saying nothing. In the rear of the cabin, passengers had started whispering. "Is he a doctor? No. I think he's something more. Maybe airline staff." Internal Inspector Cheryl retreated to the galley. She filled a glass with water, her hand trembling. Her eyes were fixed on Elias as if she'd just realized she was facing someone very different from who she thought he was. Elias returned to seat 2A. He didn't sit. He stood there, one hand resting on the seat back, eyes locked toward the front of the cabin. Paul Monroe approached, voice low. "Who are you?" Elias glanced at him, his face as calm as ever. "I'm an observer, and sometimes a recorder of what has been kept hidden." Paul nodded. "I get it. If you need a witness for anything that happened today, I'm in." A moment of silence. Elias reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small, glossy black badge engraved with FAA Inspector, United States Department of Transportation. No grand reveal. No declaration. He placed it quietly on the tray table in front of him. Jaime saw it. Her eyes widened, and then she exhaled as if releasing something she'd been carrying for too long. First class fell utterly silent, not out of fear, but because everyone was now reconsidering what they had just witnessed. The black man who had been doubted, served unequally, told to be quiet, was in fact the highest authority on this flight. Not the captain, not the VIP passenger, but the one overseeing them all. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin shifted not due to air pressure. Just minutes after Elias placed the badge on his tray, no one dared to look at him as a misplaced passenger anymore. Every gaze that turned his way was now cautious, uneasy, and calculating. In the rear galley, Cheryl Adams clutched the now cool glass of water. Her fingers gripped the rim, her lips pressed tight. 18 years in the profession had taught her how to handle demanding customers, even celebrities, politicians, intoxicated pilots. But no one had ever made her feel as exposed as Elias had. Cheryl returned to the cabin. Her face was taut, her mouth twisted into an awkward smile. "Mr. Brooks, I apologize if anything earlier made you uncomfortable. I must have misunderstood your role." Elias looked at her. There was no anger, nor forgiveness. Just a direct, unwavering stare, one that made the person across from him confront themselves. "I'm not here to be pleased," Elias replied, his voice steady like a clock. "I'm here to see how the system operates when it doesn't know it's being watched." The words dropped into the cabin like a lead weight. No one responded. Jaime stood quietly at the rear, watching Elias not with fear, but with a quiet kind of respect. Cheryl turned away, but the eyes of the passengers followed every step she took. The man who had been denied a menu, handed water in a plastic cup, was now the moral gauge for the entire flight. A ding sounded. The crew received instructions from the cockpit: prepare for lunch service. This time, Elias was served first. Cheryl personally brought the meal tray, which included a turmeric omelet, herb-buttered toast, and delicately cut fruit, all worthy of a fine restaurant. Hope this one meets the standard, she said, trying to maintain a friendly tone. Elias looked down at the tray, then back at her. Thank you. But I won't eat something that's only served after my identity is revealed. She froze. The way someone serves you reflects what they truly think of you, not after learning who you are. Cheryl stood silent, and for the first time she couldn't find a rebuttal. Across the aisle, Paul Monroe, the senator's aide, leaned in and whispered to Elias, "We often think we know who belongs where, but you just reminded me. Sometimes it's us who are out of place." Elias smiled faintly, offering no reply. Inside his jacket pocket, the leather notebook opened again. This time the words weren't just notes. Post-reveal response, performative improvement. Systemic change is not yet clear. Continued observation required. Hamey stepped forward holding a hot espresso. No instructions, no oversight. "Would you like sugar?" she asked. Elias nodded. "1 spoon is enough." She placed the cup in front of him along with a small packet of brown sugar. "Thank you for helping, Mrs. Ellen," Jamie said softly. "And thank you for not staying silent." Elias looked at her for a moment. "People like you. This is why I still believe in this industry." The cabin no longer felt as cold as before, but it wasn't warm yet either. It was learning how to adjust itself. Elias leaned back slightly, his fingers resting on the badge. He didn't need to say anything more. He had already said enough by simply being there. The flight drifted mid-air. Outside the window, the sky was a pale, quiet blue, but inside the first-class cabin, the pressure was mounting layer by layer. Cheryl Adams walked quickly into the galley, shutting the door behind her as if to block out every eye at her back. She gripped her phone and opened the internal message thread among the crew. There was an old exchange from 2 months ago between her and a now-resigned attendant. "Don't serve black passengers like VIPs, unless there's something special." "What do you mean?" "I mean first class should maintain standards. You get it." She hovered over the delete button. Her finger paused. Outside the galley, Elias Brooks was inspecting the seatbelt on 4A. It didn't fasten properly, the buckle was faulty. He made a note. He checked the oxygen supply beneath the seat. One of the tanks was leaking. A young passenger in 5B watched him hesitating. "Are you safety staff or something?" Elias offered a faint smile. "Something like that." Jaime, the young flight attendant, approached with an old envelope. She whispered, not meeting his eyes, "You need to see this." Elias opened the envelope. Inside were printed copies of emails and internal texts from Cheryl, explicitly racist content encouraging attendants to prioritize white passengers to maintain brand image. Elias read slowly without emotion. Then he nodded. "Thank you for your courage." Jaime pressed her lips together. "I couldn't pretend not to see anymore." Elias stepped to the cockpit door and knocked twice. The captain came out. "How long until we land?" The captain blinked. "About 1 hour and 15 minutes, sir." Elias handed him a printed page with a compliance code. I need a special dispatch code sent to ground control immediately. Upon landing, this flight will undergo a full inspection. The captain nodded, solemn as if receiving orders from the Pentagon. 10 minutes later, the PA system crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an announcement. Flight 722 will undergo a special technical inspection upon landing. Please remain calm and cooperative. First class was stirred. Murmurs spread. Jordan Ricks, an actor in seat 3C, turned to Elias. I've never seen this happen. Just because one passenger was mistreated. Elias replied slowly. Not just because of one passenger, but because a system has gotten far too used to not being watched. Cheryl emerged from the galley pale. She stepped closer, voice low. Mr. Brooks, may we speak privately? Elias looked at her directly. I don't handle systemic issues in private when they cause harm in public. She lowered her voice further. I didn't mean to. I was following service culture. No, Elias said, eyes still forward. You chose to uphold that culture, and today it was documented. Cheryl stood there silent. For the first time in her career, she felt small at 35,000 feet. Elias turned to Jamie and gave a subtle nod. Send all copies to the inspector's office. She nodded. An elderly passenger stood up. Ellen now recovered, gripping the seat. She spoke clearly. If he needs a witness, I'm the first. Then Paul Monroe, the political aide, stood up. I'm the second. Jordan, the actor, raised his hand. And I'm the third. I recorded the whole thing. The first-class cabin was silent. Not out of fear, but because it was changing. Elias sat back in seat 2A, said nothing more. He opened his leather notebook and wrote one final line. The silence is over. The system is being seen. The wheels touched down with a heavy yet steady thud. The cabin shook gently, then settled into a stable position. A long silence followed, as if the entire plane was holding its breath. Then the captain's voice came over the speaker, steady but more tense than usual. Ladies and gentlemen, we have safely landed at Dulles International Airport. Due to a special inspection request from the Federal Aviation Administration, please remain seated with seat belts fastened until further instruction. In first class, the silence was no longer uncomfortable. It was anticipation. Elias remained upright in 2A hands, calmly folded, eyes fixed on the partition wall ahead. His notebook was tucked away. Across the aisle, Cheryl had her head down, fingers clenched over her skirt. For the first time in 18 years, she didn't know whether to stand or sit, greet, or apologize. Jamie stood silently at the back of the cabin, her eyes on Elias. No longer curiosity, but a fragile belief, like someone who had just glimpsed a sliver of light through a crack. 5 minutes later, the cabin door opened. 3 people in navy suits boarded, composed yet firm. The lead agent held up a badge, FAA Compliance Division. We're here to receive the inspection records. Inspector Brooks, if you please. Elias stood. Not slowly, not hastily. He buttoned his jacket, adjusted his cuffs, and turned to address the cabin in a voice not loud but clear enough for all to hear. Thank you for your patience, and thank you to those who dared to speak. He looked at Cheryl for a moment. She still wouldn't lift her gaze. At the aircraft exit, Elias handed a sealed envelope to the team leader of the inspection team. Evidence collected from the first class includes images, internal messages, preliminary statements, and safety violations. The man nodded, his eyes serious. "We will take appropriate action. This is no longer an incident. This is a precedent that must be changed." Elias stepped off the plane. Afternoon sunlight slanted across the tarmac, illuminating the tall figure in the gray suit. Every step he took left a mark not on the concrete, but in the minds of all who had witnessed. Back inside the cabin, a new announcement sounded. "Ms. Cheryl Adams, please remain on board to speak with the inspection team. All other crew may disembark after the passengers." Cheryl looked up one last time, eyes meeting Jamie's. The young attendant looked at her, not with malice or contempt, but with the quiet disappointment of a new generation, just beginning to learn how to say no. At the terminal, Elias walked through the airport corridor where hundreds of people rushed with luggage on phone calls hailing taxis. But he wasn't in a hurry. His phone buzzed. A message from FAA headquarters. "Full report received. The director requests a meeting tomorrow morning. Thank you for not turning a blind eye." Elias put the phone away without replying, because he knew the best answers aren't sent in messages. They're delivered through action. That evening, Atlantic Sky released a press statement. "We pledge full cooperation with the FAA. Flight attendant Cheryl Adams has been suspended pending investigation. We will be reviewing our internal training protocols regarding equality and service fairness." Beneath the article, thousands of shares appeared with the hashtags #Seat2A, Silent Audit, Justice in the Air. But Elias didn't read the news. He sat alone in his small apartment near Ronald Reagan Station, an unopened suitcase, a warm cup of tea, and the leather notebook with a few blank pages remaining. He turned to the next page and wrote a single line. "A first-class cabin corrected is the first signal of an industry relearning how to serve." 3 days after Flight 722, the video of Elias assisting Mrs. Ellen and silently revealing his FAA inspector badge surpassed 3 million views on social media. No music, no effects. Just slow, steady footage, a well-dressed black man doubted, then rising quietly and forcing an entire first-class cabin to reflect on itself. Below the video, thousands of comments appeared. He didn't need to speak loudly. His presence was enough. "I've seen this happen over and over for years, but this is the first time someone made the system listen." At the FAA headquarters in Washington, D.C., Elias walked into the large conference room on the 7th floor. Executive Director Walter Clemens was already waiting along with the legal team and internal communications staff. On the screen was the title, "Proposal to Expand Equity Oversight, Especially Within Commercial Aviation." Elias sat down holding no notes. He had memorized every word he needed to say. Walter looked at him and spoke slowly. "You didn't have to go public. You could have just filed a report and handled it internally, but you showed the entire country that silence is also a form of complicity." "Well," Elias replied softly, "because I stayed silent for too long." The meeting lasted 2 hours. It ended with a decision the FAA would establish a new unit, the Civil Equity Compliance Division, designed, proposed, and led by Elias Brooks. Its mission to audit airlines for equity in service hiring, complaint response, and internal culture. That evening, Elias received an email from an anonymous sender. Subject: "This is what Atlantic Sky tried to hide." Attached was a PDF and internal report detailing feedback from minority passengers. The first line made Elias pause. "Passengers of color tend to file fewer complaints but report 43% higher dissatisfaction. Recommendation: reduce investment in improvement programs for this group." a policy calculated through silence. Elias forwarded the report to the inspection team and the Department of Transportation. Then he closed his laptop and stepped onto the balcony. Washington at night was bright but distant. Government buildings stood silent like they'd grown sleepy on old power. He took a deep breath, then pressed record on his log device. No one is born to sit in the back row. No one deserves worse service just because of their skin or how they appear. The next day, Cheryl Adams was officially terminated. Atlantic Sky released a formal apology not just to Elias, but to all marginalized passengers who had faced unfair treatment. But the public response wasn't soft. Hashtags like #Seat2A, #EqualSkies, and #We remember how you treated us trended across social media. Dozens of passengers shared their own experiences of discrimination in looks and tone, in how tea was served, or how they were asked to switch seats. An Asian woman shared, "I was once told to speak English more gently if I wanted better service. Turns out I wasn't imagining it." A Latino man wrote, "This was the first time I saw a person of color not bow their head but rise right in the sky." Thank you, Elias. Elias gave no interviews, wrote no statements, issued no thank you posts. He did one thing: opened a new office on the 10th floor of the FAA with a modest plaque, Civil Equity Compliance Division, because dignity flies higher than any plane. Jaime, the young flight attendant from Flight 722, was the first to be invited to join. Not because she provided evidence, but because she had done the right thing before anyone else dared to. In its first month of operation, the Civil Equity Compliance Division, led by Elias Brooks, conducted 5 undercover audits across 5 major airlines. He traveled alone. No team, no notice. He booked tickets sometimes in economy, sometimes in business, occasionally in the exit row, and always unrecognized. On a short flight from Atlanta to Miami, Elias, this time wearing a polo shirt and baseball cap, was asked to step aside to verify his seat just before takeoff. The young flight attendant, after seeing the valid ticket, mumbled, "Sometimes the system misplaces seats." On another airline, when Elias asked for a pillow, a white attendant handed him a used one with a broken neck strap. The white man next to him, well-dressed, asked for the same and was immediately given a fresh pillow, a hot towel, and an apology. Elias didn't react. He opened his notebook and wrote, "Prejudice standardized by indifference." At his FAA office desk, the files piled high. Each folder has a story. A black mother forced to switch seats for disturbing a neighboring passenger. An Asian passenger with a disability was ignored during a medical incident. A group of indigenous students was misnamed repeatedly, then labeled non-compliant in passenger records. Each story is a small incision, precise but deep. And together, Elias began to see an entire map of invisible flight paths, paths of bias, of silence, of systematic exclusion. One late evening, Elias held a closed meeting with his new audit team on the 10th floor. He stood before the whiteboard and wrote 3 lines. 1. No one is invisible. 2. No airline is above accountability. 3. No system stands firm when built on discrimination. He turned to look at each person in the room. "We're not here to take anyone down. We're here to shine light into corners where people are used to living in the dark." Jaime, now the East Region lead inspector, nodded. "And what if they cover the light?" Elias replied as softly as breath. "Then we become the light." But light also draws shadows. Less than a week later, Elias received notice. One major airline, Sky North, had filed an internal complaint accusing his division of overstepping authority, damaging brand reputation, and exhibiting reverse bias. The media began to split. Some conservative outlets declared, "We're turning aviation into a moral courtroom. What happened to business freedom?" Anonymous industry forums said plainly, "Don't let a black man think he's the moral police of the skies." Elias didn't respond. He knew. Resistance isn't about speaking up. It's about continuing to walk, even when the ground tilts beneath you. Late one night, Elias returned to Dulles Airport, this time not as an inspector, but as a passenger. He sat in the last row of the plane, near the restroom by the engine, a cramped and noisy spot. But from there, he saw what first class never did. A single mother asking for extra milk for her child ignored. An elderly brown-skinned man pressed the call button 3 times. No one came. A young man in a hoodie asked, "Is that your seat?" just because of how he looked. Elias took notes, not just with ink, but with his eyes, his presence, and with silence, heavier than any argument. On that flight, a young brown-skinned flight attendant whispered as she passed, "I recognize you. I saw the video. Thank you for doing what most of us only dream of doing." Elias smiled. "Don't thank me. Let your next flight be your answer." 3 days after Flight 722, a video clip showing Elias helping Ellen and quietly flashing his FAA badge surpassed 3 million views on social media. No background music, no effects, just slow, quiet images. A polite black man doubted, then silently standing up, making the entire first-class cabin look inward. Beneath the video, thousands of comments. He didn't need to speak loudly. His presence was enough. "I've seen this over and over for years, but this is the first time someone made the whole system listen." At FAA headquarters in Washington, D.C., Elias entered a vast hearing room on the 7th floor. Executive Director Walter Clemens was waiting with the legal team and internal communications officers. On the screen, a title, "Proposal to Expand Equity Compliance Oversight, Especially in Commercial Aviation." Elias sat down without either a pen or a notepad. He had everything he needed in memory. Walter looked at him and spoke slowly. "You didn't have to make it public. You could have just filed a report and handled it internally, but you let the entire country see that silence is a form of complicity." Elias replied softly, "Because I've been silent too long." The meeting lasted 2 hours. It ended with a decision FAA would establish a new unit, the Civil Equity Compliance Division, proposed, designed, and led by Elias Brooks. Its mission is to audit airlines on fairness in service hiring, complaint responses, and internal culture. That evening, Elias received an anonymous email. Subject: "Here's what Atlantic Sky has been hiding." Attached was a PDF, an internal company report analyzing minority customer feedback. The first line made Elias pause. Minority passengers tend to file fewer complaints but report 43% higher dissatisfaction. Recommendation: reduce investment in service improvement programs for this group. A policy calculated in silence. Elias forwarded the report to the inspection team and the Department of Transportation, then closed his laptop and stepped onto the balcony. Washington by night gleamed brightly, but it was distant. Government buildings stood quiet as if asleep atop old power. He took a deep breath, then pressed record on his voice logger. No one is born to sit in the back. No one deserves lesser service just because of their skin or how they show up. The next day, Cheryl Adams was officially terminated. Atlantic Sky issued an apology not just to Elias, but to every minority passenger ever mistreated. But the public's reaction wasn't gentle. Hashtags like #C2A equals skies and "We remember how you treated us" trended across social media. Passengers began sharing their own stories of discrimination, from how they were looked at to how they were addressed to how tea was served or seats reassigned. An Asian woman shared, "I was once told to soften my English if I wanted better service. I guess I wasn't imagining it." A Latino man wrote, "For the first time, I saw a man of color not bow his head but rise right there in the sky." Thank you, Elias. Elias gave no interviews, wrote no thank you pieces. He did one thing, opened his new office on the FAA's 10th floor beneath a small plaque, Civil Equity Compliance Division, because dignity flies higher than any plane. Jaime, the young flight attendant from Flight 722, was the first hire. Not because she provided evidence, but because she did the right thing before anyone else dared to. In its first month, the Civil Equity Compliance Division conducted 5 undercover audits across major airlines. Elias didn't travel with a team. He made no announcements, just quietly booked tickets, sometimes in economy, sometimes in business, occasionally near the emergency exit, and always as an unrecognized passenger. On a short flight from Atlanta to Miami, Elias, this time in a polo shirt and baseball cap, was asked to recheck his ticket moments before takeoff. The young attendant, seeing the valid ticket, muttered, "Sometimes the system glitches seats." On another airline, when Elias requested a pillow, a white attendant handed him a used one with a broken neck clasp. The white man next to him, well-dressed, asked and immediately received a new pillow, a warm towel, and an apology. Elias said nothing. He wrote, "Prejudice calibrated into normalized indifference." On his FAA desk, the case files piled high, each one a story. A black mother forced to change seats for disturbing a nearby passenger. An Asian disabled man was ignored during a medical situation. A group of native students repeatedly misnamed throughout the flight, then labeled uncooperative in the passenger log. Each story has a precise cut. And when placed side by side, Elias saw an invisible map, a flight path of prejudice, of silence, and of systemized dismissal. One late evening, Elias convened a closed meeting with his new audit team on the 10th floor. He stood before a whiteboard and wrote 3 lines. 1. No one is invisible. 2. No airline is exempt. 3. No system built on bias stands forever. He turned to face the room. "We're not here to take anyone down. We're here to shine light on corners where people got used to shadows." Jamie, now Eastern Regional Lead, nodded. "And what if they block the light?" Elias replied like a whisper. "Then we become the light." But light also attracts darkness. Less than a week later, Elias was notified that one major airline, Sky North, had filed an internal complaint accusing his unit of overreach brand damage and reverse bias. The media split. Some conservative outlets said, "We're turning air travel into a moral courtroom." What happened to free enterprise industry forums posted anonymously, "Don't let one black man play morality cop for the skies." Elias stayed silent. He knew resistance didn't speak in arguments, but in choosing to keep walking, even when the ground tilts beneath you. One late night, Elias returned to Dulles Airport not as an inspector, but as a passenger. He sat in the last row near the toilet above the engine, a cramped and noisy space. But from there, he saw things first class never would. A single mother asking for more milk ignored. An elderly brown man pressed the call button 3 times, no one came. A young black man asked, "Is this your seat just for wearing a hoodie?" Elias documented it, not just with ink, but with presence, with silence heavier than argument. On that flight, a young brown flight attendant whispered while passing, "I know who you are. I watched every video. Thank you for doing what many in this industry only wish they could." Elias smiled. "Don't thank me. Let your next flight be the answer."